Welcome back to the DRH Show. I'm delighted to have a truly remarkable guest whose work is transforming how people understand brain health, screen use, and addiction recovery. She is a certified brain health and sex addiction recovery coach with over 25 years of scientific, clinical, and personal transformation experience in neurofeedback, communication, and cognitive sciences. An advocate for authentic living, she is also the author of Mind Over Explicit Matter, regarded as a leading resource in porn addiction recovery. Her mission is to help people revitalize their brains, put down their screens, and live with purpose. Dr. Trish Leigh, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm very glad to be here.
Okay, so Dr. Lee, so what first drew you to explore the neuroscience behind screen and porn addiction, and why does it matter now more than ever? So, if you could also just give us a quick snapshot of your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Sure, yeah. Well, I always joke that my life exists in 7-year chapters. So my work has basically kind of been evolving over, decades in 7-year increments. What I mean by that is I've always studied neuroscience and cognitive science, but about a decade ago, I pivoted into porn addiction, the good old fashioned way. I write about it in my book, Mind Over Explicit Matter, where I learned after some time that a friend of mine, someone close to me, was struggling with porn addiction. And I, felt compelled to help him after he could not find help through many professionals. And in doing so, I realized that all of those changes and kind of developments in my professional and personal life led me to be perfectly prepared to be able to help him. And I was able to help him very quickly. And then I felt like I had this giant secret. And I literally had to sit in the blue chairs behind me and think, porn addiction? Am I going to like tell the world about porn addiction? And I mean, the answer was yes. There was no keeping that secret to myself. So since then, I've been helping individuals and then ultimately partners and relationships. And I'm on a mission to help people understand how to balance their screen time in general. And hopefully we'll dive into that. But explicit matter has to go because it's a super normal stimulus that's hijacking people's brains. And just one more thing, at the same time, I am the mother of 5 children who are now young adults. My oldest is 22. My youngest is 15. I have 2 boys and 3 girls. So I've also lived this experience also.
Interesting. So, Dr. Lee, I want to move the conversation because you mentioned something about stimulus. So, I want to move the conversation from willpower to brain design because
Mhm.
I think that once you understand that, the question becomes how technology has learned to kind of exploit that design. So, how does that relate to what you describe as supernormal stimuli, the way screens pulls us in without our awareness?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a new message that I've been trying to get out into the world that I'm calling miswired by the algorithm, where, our brains are becoming miswired literally on a neurological level to go back to our screens that are considered supernormal stimuli. And what I mean by that is it is a dopamine dependency. So, supernormal stimuli are classified as activities that are artificial and they produce more dopamine, higher levels of dopamine in the brain than natural activities would. Most of those activities for the vast majority of people are screen based now, and it starts with Snapchats, which all my kids are using, text messages, emails, short form video, long form video, all the way up to explicit matter at the top. So what people don't understand is every time they go back and they're seeking and they're scrolling and they're searching, that's a dopamine activity. That alone is bringing the brain back into the screen. Then when you find something that kind of lights your brain up, whether it be drama, violence, or explicit matter, your brain lands in a position where now it's becoming linked to the thing that you're consuming. So it's really like the first time ever in history that children and adults are passively consuming content that is miswiring their brains to come back. The fallout of that is an increase in ADHD and attention challenges, anxiety, depression, and more disconnection than ever.
I think, just to follow up on that, I think that suggests that the issue isn't just some sort of mental clutter, but it's also something happening deeper in the body's regulation system. So, what do you mean when you say this goes beyond attention and involves the nervous system itself?
Sure. So in my work, I'm able
Mm-hmm.
to visualize how people's brains perform. I've performed well over 50,000 brain scans using something called QEEG brain mapping. I do it every day. I spend all day, every day helping people by being able to visualize how their brain functioning and performance has changed. So, what I mean by, the algorithm miswiring our brains, what it's actually doing is creating a brain functioning pattern that the easiest way for me to speak about it is it's wired and tired. It's increased in the very fast speeds in the brain. They're called high beta. That creates more stress, more anxiety, that ramped up feeling that people have, rumination, vigilance, hypervigilance, can't turn their brains off. Sleep issues obviously come out of that. On the other end of the spectrum is the too slow speed that is designed for us to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep. But now, what screens are doing is increasing the use of these slow speeds, delta and theta, during the active state. That's what leads to difficulty attending and focusing, executive function issues, planning, organization. It makes it very difficult for people to think because they feel wired and tired, stressed out, anxious, and fatigued. And this is at the neurological level. I see this. The brain has changed its performance pattern. One more thing before I throw it back, I call that pattern strained brain. It's very far out from the highly regulated pattern in the middle of calm focus. There's another pattern that I see that I refer to as drained brain. Drained brain is that calm pattern on steroids, meaning that if you desensitize your brain enough through excessive dopamine, you will literally burn out the dopamine receptors and you will get stuck in neutral. Being stuck in neutral leads to lack of motivation, it leads to depression, it leads to arousal dysfunction, and namely, it leads to sexual arousal dysfunction and ED.
And I don't know if this is a right way to phrase this, but based from what you said, but I suppose we're also kind of conditioning the next generation's nervous system to live in overdrive. So I'm curious, Dr. Leigh, how you think that kind of constant stimulation is shaping the development of children and teenagers' brain over time.
Yeah, sure. One thing I would like to point out is
Mhm.
that I'm the messenger here, is that everything that I'm sharing with you is scientifically validated. So in Mind Over Explicit Matter, it's published through HarperCollins. They made me delete the number of references that I had. I had to decrease it. I had too many scientific references. It was too scientific heavy. But that I want you to know there's science behind everything I say. I'm working on my next book, which is exploring the impact of screen time, not necessarily explicit matter, but the impact of screen time in general on children and young adults. And we call them digital natives, the first generation that grew up with a phone in their pocket. And there are some significant consequences that are happening. We know what I just shared with you about ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, disconnection. It's all proven, scientifically validated. Those changes in the brain are what I focus on. But we know there's lots of science showing these trends in mental and physical health are, in fact, happening and scientifically validated. An interesting thing is that this is the first time in history where the younger generation is worse off in terms of health than the generation before. Historically speaking, the younger generation is better off. This is the first time, and it's no coincidence that phones and screens are at play. We know there's significant mental and physical health issues. So, what I have been studying is mostly social media and the impact of the hearts and the likes and the artificial flames and the fires that people receive in terms of the external validation that people are receiving when they get those thumbs up or when they give them. And what's happening is we know that this is creating what's called parasocial relationships, transactional relationships, where they are based on this external validation. One significant consequence that's happening is that young people are not forming their identity from the inside out. Their identity formation is fragmenting, and it's based on where they're getting the most validation on their screens.
Mhm. And it also raises the question of how this plays out with something more specific, like pornography addiction, as you mentioned earlier. So, why should pornography addiction be understood as a neurological issue rather than a moral one?
Sure. So
Mm.
first of all, we there's known brain dysfunction patterns that I study them myself. I've treated thousands and thousands of people who show up with strained brain and drained brain. After I identify it for them and with them, then I'm able to use technology to help remediate and to allow these patterns to move back towards the regulated pattern. So it is very much validated. It's my book is filled with the science that validates that. But I'm glad you brought up the moral issue because, we've thought of this as a moral issue for a very long time. And especially when a partner finds out that, generally it's women, we can talk about that if you want, but generally women find out that their boyfriend or husband has been using porn for a very long time and they're very upset about it. So it feels moral. It will give the man generally a lot of shame and guilt because they can't stop watching porn. But this is what I want people to know. There is a dopamine dependency at the core of that. Just like a drug addiction, just like alcoholism, there's studies that validate the brain pattern that I see that's associated with porn addiction is the very same one that's implicated in drug addictions and in gambling addiction. Gambling addiction is a behavioral addiction. So is pornography addiction. Now, it feels loaded, obviously, because it involves sexuality and intimacy. This is where the moral piece comes in. And a lot of times when I'm working with partners, I'll say to them, like, I don't want to sound cold, but I do want to make the point that it's not about sex, it's about the levels of dopamine that the person's brain is getting from sex. So I'll say, think of this like a gambling addiction. Like if money was at risk, yes, that would be frustrating, but it wouldn't have the same heightened emotional response for all people. So I want people to know this is a dopamine dependency first and foremost. And I see those changes in the brain. They are validated by science. Secondarily, there's reinforcement loops. Every time you go back to explicit matter, you're reinforcing that change in the brain, that miswiring, that link of the brain to whatever you're consuming on the screen. And it becomes very difficult to break. From a moral standpoint, it's almost impossible to break. The way I help people um, change that link and get back to allowing their dopamine production to be associated with the real world events is what I call a pleasure pathway reset. And it's a double entendre. The double entendre is we're resetting those pathways in the brain, but we're also resetting the pathways back to their real life relationships, their work, and their hobbies.
So essentially, the brain adapts by lowering its own sensitivity to keep balance. And you mentioned earlier that there's science behind this, and you mentioned that you've analyzed over 50,000 brain scans. So Dr. Lee, seeing those patterns must give you a very concrete picture of how imbalance shows up in real time. And I imagine that is what led you to start using QEEG brain mapping. So, if you could tell us how that process actually works and what is it like for someone to see their own brain activity for the first time?
Sure. Yeah. I've actually been using brain mapping and neurofeedback for a very long time before I pivoted my work into porn addiction. And an interesting thing happened is that those brain patterns that I'm talking about, strained brain and drained brain, especially drained brain, in all of the brain scans I did before I pivoted into porn addiction, I never saw those brain patterns. I never saw drain brain. So now I keep seeing it show up in all the people that I'm working with who are recovering from porn addiction. And that is what actually made me want to study this. And I've been doing research studies because I want to add to the literature. But what happened for me, and part of like what I was telling you about, where I was trying to decide, like, am I going to show up and start talking about porn? And we can double back to, I had to struggle with that. It's not even about watching porn, it's about talking about porn to other people. But I realized that brain mapping and neurofeedback is the number one way to help a person regulate these dysfunctional patterns in their brain as quickly as possible. Most of the people that I work with, they get to a level of desperation and they want to break this because their partner found out, but they can't stop watching porn. That's when you have urges. The urges are the need for the brain to get a dump of dopamine to alleviate, like you suggested, changes in baseline tonic dopamine levels and the need for these phasic dopamine spikes. So when a person sees their brain map for the first time, they are relieved to know that there is, even when it has a lot of dysfunction, people, I've done 5 brain maps this week. All 5 people said, I have this strange feeling that I I should be upset there's this much dysfunction, but I'm actually relieved because it explains their experience. It explains why first thing in the morning all they can think about is watching porn. They can't go to work until they get their fix of dopamine. That's because their brain's been trained that works really hard. But the reason is, work would be where the dopamine was if the brain wasn't hijacked to only get high levels of dopamine from the screen. So people are really relieved. And then all my work is measurable. I measure it in the brain map or the brain scan. If a person decides to join my program, every single session, we can see within and across the sessions the changes in their brain. So they're relieved. Then, as they see their brain improving, they're highly motivated. A person told me yesterday, these changes make it so I can keep going even when it's difficult. It can be difficult at the beginning, but as we transform the negative feedback loop through neuroplasticity and we change it to a positive feedback loop, an upward spiral, then the flywheel happens where a person can create long-term change.
And that must be quite powerful, especially when someone finally sees proof of what they've been experiencing. And like what you've mentioned earlier, Dr. Leigh, your work later expanded beyond porn recovery to into the wider issue of digital overload. So I want to touch upon how your son Declan, how his
Mhm.
story influenced that shift and the creation of Rewire.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Declan, actually, I talked to Declan yesterday, and so let me frame it first in what we're talking about here. I founded a nonprofit organization 5, 6, 7 years ago now. It is called Porn Brain Prevention. But every day and every year, the P word, porn, becomes more difficult to put online. This is kind of the cruel irony of porn addiction, is that it's easy for porn platforms and on social media for low key explicit matter or high key explicit matter to be available to people. But in my work and trying to help people, it's very difficult to use the word porn. So, my son Declan, who's now 21, he's graduating from business school in May, and he had a strong interest. He's been working with me for a long time. Um, he just through knowledge and inspiration of being in my home, he put blockers on his own screens when he was young, 18 years old, 17, 18. I can remember him and his friends sitting around and they're all on Tinder or some dating app. And Declan's like uncomfortable because they're all getting logins and he didn't want to. It's been a journey for him. So he has decided to take up the cause of porn brain prevention, and we're renaming it and shifting the focus to screens in general. We're naming it Screen Rewire. He's been working on creating his own videos. I have, excuse me, I have 3 YouTube channels where I produce a lot of content. So Declan's going to be the face of Screen Rewire. And I love that because he's a young man. He's the avatar that's most affected by explicit matter, especially pornography proper and explicit matter on social media. And this really matters to him. And before I throw it back to you, the thing, he called me yesterday and he told me that he got sucked into gaming late at night with his friends for like 3 days in a row. He was up till 3 a.m. gaming. Declan's very organized. He's in school for business with a minor in computer programming. He's very busy. So it took him 3 days to realize this and unplug himself, but he's really cute. He told me he was doing this whole thing with like post-it notes on his wall, and he was doing some game that has like problem solving in that. But long story short, he was taking the elements of the game that he felt sucked him in, and he was creating it in his real life to be able to get back to rocking out his goals. For a lot of people, that could take years to unlink your brain from the dopamine in the screen. And he just inherently created a plan to unlink and get going again in his life.
And you've really demonstrated that you can bring science, what you're doing, into family life rather than just keeping it in the lab. So you mentioned that your parent earlier on. So as a parent yourself, Dr. Leigh, how has raising 5 children in such, it might sound cliche, but it's such a connected world, how your approach of how do you approach these issues professionally? Because you're not just a mother, but you're also professional.
Yeah. And this has been the biggest silver lining for me personally, because when porn landed in my lap, I really did struggle with, okay, like I'm gonna have to tell my kids, they were younger, a lot younger than, 10, 11, 9, 4, like I'm gonna have to tell my kids that I'm working on porn, explain it to them, but it's been the greatest gift because we talk about pornography and masturbation. I mean, we don't talk about it all the time, but it's not, it's demystified. We don't have shame around it because we're talking about it in a scientific way, and in a way that those are behaviors that don't lead you toward your goal, they lead you away from your goal. And then ultimately teaching the kids to balance their screen time. The interesting thing as the mother of 5 kids is that each one of my kids has struggled with screens in a different way. That has really blown me away because as I doubled down on my commitment to this, I had to show up differently for each one of the kids, but with the goal of creating balanced screen time. And I can just explain that a little bit. My oldest daughter, um, this is my take on it. Like immediately, she did not want to be hypersexualized. So she just started wearing big baggy clothing, kind of like Billie Eilish did, and ultimately really still does. Billie Eilish, the singer. My son Declan, he's second. I told you his journey. Then my third daughter, she lent towards becoming objectified. She started posting a lot of hypersexualized content. And I ended up having to take her phone away. And the way that I do it, and to answer the question too, is I give the kids the opportunity to regulate. I help them co regulate using strategies, but Fiona couldn't regulate in this condition. So I had to cancel her phone number because I told her, you once you get it together, then you can have your phone back 3 days after that, something like that. She never could get it together and she kept freaking out. I'm like, and if you can't regulate yourself, I will cancel your phone number just to make it end. It worked. She thanks me to this day for doing that for her, for having the strength because it was not easy. Then my son Seamus, gamers are gonna game. He loves to game, and through his young life, I established rules for him. I would make him follow those rules, and he still does it. He'll game with his friends, and then I'll hear them outside playing basketball. Then they'll go get food. He's 19 years old. So, like, all that work I put in when he was young has really paid off in adulthood. He still does that balance of real life fun, gaming with his friends for fun. And then Saoirse's my youngest daughter. She's very balanced in the way that she uses it because I started so much earlier with her. She's a really great example of a person who uses their technology for purpose, for identity creation from within. She rides horses. So everything she does is she's posting horse stuff. She's part of the horse community by staying connected online. Really beautiful.
Mhm. And what you shared us about parenting, this really exposes the tension between what we know about the brain and how we actually live day to day. And this ties in with your idea of the supernormal life. And this seems to come from, trying to bridge that gap. So I just wanna hear from you. How does someone begin to move from digital overload towards a more grounded and um, purposeful way of living?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm,
Uh, and going back to like when I was explaining, or you were actually explaining my credentials, that, for 25, 30 years, not only I have a lot of degrees, so I was going to school for a long time, but I kind of fell in love with personal transformation way back then. I fell in love with the idea that, from what I know, I have one time around on this marble, in the sky, and that I do it every day. I think to myself on my deathbed, will I have lived the life that I wanted to? And that perspective helps me to show up. One thing that I really want is to be the best mom that I can to my kids. And don't get me wrong, I'm nowhere near perfect, but I am constantly trying and I am evolving. I'm getting better all the time. So it has to be you set the GPS for your life, then you let the GPS take you where you set it. This is the exact opposite of passive consumption of supernormal stimuli. People get up and they just get on their phone and just start scrolling, and you'll just take in anything that's thrown at you. This is the miswiring by the algorithm. I've taught my kids to curate their feeds. Actually, we've taught each other to do that, like together. I think it's really cool. Each one of them has learned to just curate their feeds for their interests and their motivations. That's super normal living. So when it comes to, balanced life and balanced screen time, it's you choose how you're going to use your screens. You don't allow anybody who's online to pop into your life. That's a no. You choose who gets your time and attention. It's said now that it's an attention economy. Everybody out there online is fighting for your attention. Work with the people who are trying to get your attention to help you accomplish your goals. Those are the people that you want to spend your time with online, whether that be in person or quote unquote influencers. I think about this word influencer because influencers are influencing you. So you have to be really careful about what are they influencing you to do? When it comes to pornography, they're influencing you towards hypersexuality and away from your relationship. Is that your goal? Probably not. Most people's goal is to build healthy intimacy and to have an awesome sex life in their real life. That porn is taking you away from that. OnlyFans, social media that's hypersexualized. That's why I mentioned drama and violence also, because if hypersexualized media isn't a thing for you, we know that most of what's posted is just to increase drama, which, by the way, increases strained brain, or to consume violence. And that is also increasing your strained brain. It is not increasing calm focus. So you decide, you set the intention, and then you move towards that, your goals.
and that comes down to like identifying the distinction between artificial stimulation and real connection, and that it's kind of central to what you were teaching. We've been talking for the last few minutes here, Dr. Lee. So I suppose one of the takeaways is that once people kind of understand that shift in how their brains actually work, I imagine that their reactions can be quite powerful. So I want to touch upon, because you've done a lot of talks, you've done a lot of videos, and they reach wide audiences. So what kind of responses stand out to you the most when you talk about this stuff to people?
It really is
Mm,
awareness. I think if I had to say one thing, people don't understand what the algorithm's doing to them. I actually had to explain it to my husband. My husband, traditionally he doesn't use social media. He doesn't use social media still, but the kids walk by and they're like, "Dad's into brain rot," because he was watching like some football game on YouTube, and then he got down a click hole of like tsunamis or something. He didn't understand. He watched it for like 40 minutes, and that's why the kid said, but it was just, this artificial drama violence thing. Then the next one started, and I was explaining to him, I'm like, miswired by the algorithm means, I said, check what Google is is suggesting to you. And I read through mine to him. It was all brain stuff. There was like, you know, yesterday was Starbucks Red Cup Day because I have the Starbucks app. So it was feeding me Starbucks stuff, but like it's feeding me things based on what I have already gone to. So I think the number one thing that people just aren't even aware that, you know, what you are being fed online altogether is
Mhm,
an algorithm designed to
mhm,
hook you in.
mhm. And that really makes sense because it turns shame into understanding, which is often the real turning point. But once people reach that awareness, they still have to start somewhere. So for those who feel trapped in digital habits, what's a practical first step towards regaining control?
Yeah, that's why I'm such a fan of brain mapping and neurofeedback because for
Mhm,
people who are stuck, especially those brain maps, they show up as
mhm,
all red. It's red chaos. People who are stuck, it's very difficult to unstick yourself. And now there is technology that exists. That's why I was so excited when I was working with neurodevelopmental disorders, neurodegenerative, you know, I was working kind of more like medically and then I found out about this. I'm like, I am literally perfectly positioned to help people quickly. The reason I can help people through brain mapping and technology is because it's a behavioral addiction. So if I can shift their brain a little with the technology, that is what allows them to grab hold of the behaviors they have not been able to grab hold of by themselves. And we live in a world now that this technology exists. It's relatively affordable for the average person, and everybody could use it to get control of their brains again and get back to that intentional living. I use it myself all the time.
absolutely. Now, lovely talking to you, Dr. Lee. But before we wrap up, let's end on a lighter note with some quick
Yeah,
fire questions to get to know you a bit better. So, my
sure.
first quick fire question is, what were you afraid of as a child?
Afraid of. I'm not a person who has a lot of fears. I don't
Mm,
know. Fear?
okay. So
I
you're
don't know.
quite afraid, yeah.
One thing I can tell you is obviously I like to know things. I
Mm,
think if it's my greatest fear, it's like not understanding something because that's what happens to me. That's why I always joke with people. If you know me, if something comes towards me, I won't fully understand it.
yeah, and that's why
Lack
you
of
became a
knowledge. I'm
scientist.
going with that.
Yeah, and that's why you became a scientist. So,
It
second
is.
one is, what is your favorite word in another language?
My favorite word in another language. My favorite word is falsha. It means welcome in Gaelic. I'm
Oh,
Irish.
okay. And if you hadn't been doing what you're doing, what would you have pursued in your life?
I wanted to either be a doctor or an attorney, but I am a person with positivity, but I love
Mm,
like differential diagnosis. But when I was a kid, I wanted to be president, even though I'm the least political person. You know, it would be something with helping people that are kind of like seen as underdogs rise up
mhm.
and thrive.
Fair enough. And finally, the floor is all yours. What should people take away from today's conversation?
One thing that I say a lot is that it's important to have pragmatic hope because I do work with, you know, a lot of people who they feel hopeless. They're not sharing their situation with people because of the shame. And so many people I talk to think that they have to like live the way they're living for the rest of their life and take the things they're doing to their grave. I've heard that one too many times. I want you to know there is a way and it's simple, not easy, but you know, pragmatic hope. That means you have to have the hope that you can change and change immediately, but you have to do new things. You can't do the same things and get the same outcome. So that's what I want people to know. Pragmatic hope. Hang on to that.
Okay, that's a fantastic note to end on. Your insights into brain health, digital habits, and human potential have been truly enlightening. Dr. Trish Lee, it's been a real pleasure having you on the VRH
Yeah,
show.
thanks.
And I look forward to seeing how your work continues to help people reclaim focus, purpose, and authentic living.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.